Hello, I'm Jennifer McClendon, SFMA's Education Manager. Thank you for joining us today for our post-conference educational session. Today, our speakers will be Dr. Tyler Carr and Dr. Dan Sandor. Dr. Carr, a native of Whitehall, Arkansas, is currently an assistant professor and turfgrass extension specialist in the Department of Horticulture and Crop Science at The Ohio State University. Tyler received his master's and bachelor's in turfgrass science and management from the University of Arkansas prior to obtaining his Ph.D. from the University of Tennessee. Tyler's research interests include developing and fine-tuning cultural practices to reduce fertilizer, pesticide, water, and labor inputs in turfgrass systems. He aims to develop an extension program that is driven by stakeholder input and addresses their specific needs through applied research and educational programming. Dr. Dan Sandor has been an assistant professor of turfgrass science at Virginia Tech since 2019. He holds a 100% teaching appointment and leads the undergraduate education and research programs and serves as the faculty advisor for the Virginia Tech Turfgrass Club. Dr. Sandor is also heavily involved in the Virginia Tech Turfgrass program's extension and outreach education programs. His research background is in enhancing water conservation efforts in turfgrass systems and improving turfgrass cultural practices to reduce the use of inputs. Dr. Sandor earned his Ph.D. at the University of Arkansas and served as a postdoctoral associate at the University of Minnesota prior to working at Virginia Tech. Dr. Carr and Dr. Sandor will be presenting data and decisions, applying research in sports field management practices. Dr. Carr and Dr. Sandor?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, Dr. Sandor and I have known each other for quite a long time. What would you say, about since 2014?
10 years, man.
Yeah,
I
10
got
years.
to Arkansas in 2013, and you were just an undergrad, getting your feet wet up with Steve Lord at the Reds and Dave Miller at the Red Sox. So no, Tyler and I are excited to be here today. Thank you for having us, Jennifer and the SFMA and Education Committee. Thank you for being here, all the attendees on Zoom. So as we get started today, we're kind of still learning Zoom after 3 years of COVID. So Tyler's going to be advancing the slides today for us. But question we have for you guys, have you heard this phrase before, that turfgrass management is an art and a science? That's something I share with my students. I know Tyler shares it in a lot of his extension programming with stakeholders and practitioners and professionals like yourself. But what does this mean? Turfgrass management is an art and a science. Think about the sports field or the facility, the parks that you're managing. If you're in Parks and Recreation, think of that as like the canvas. But then, that must mean that you, as the sports field manager, you're the artist, right? And we have programs in the SFMA that promote your handiwork and your artistic skills, things like Field of the Years awards and things like the Stars and Stripes contest. I think Pioneer and other industry organizations have similar contests as well. It's an art and a science. But where does this science fit in, or how does this fit in? Tyler, if you want to advance the screen, let's think about this in terms of an art and a science. Where does the science fit in? Well, when we think about science, a lot of what Tyler and I, in our discussions with professionals like you and other industry practitioners, we often think of science in terms of scientific data. And after all, the topic today is data and decisions. And, there's a lot of decisions that you all have to make, in terms of, field management, agronomy, meteorology and forecasts, and how those play a role in your management practices. Even things such as like testing the field for safety, or watering the infield skin, applying pesticides, pulling tarps, even things like your chemical inventory and your budgets and for fertilizers and pesticides and lots of things, lots of decisions that you all have to make. But let's consider a lot of these decisions, they're rooted in scientific research. They're rooted in scientific data. That's where the science comes in when we talk about turfgrass management being an art and a science. And one of the big tools that we have nowadays, and one of the nice resources that we have nowadays, recently that's been developed by, I think, originally from the Mid-Atlantic SFMA chapter, is a document or a manual for sports field managers called the Best Management Practices for the Sports Field Manager, Professional Guide for Environmental Sports Field Management. And, this document's available at the web link below. It's even customizable. You can download it and customize it to your facilities, to your needs or your specific circumstances or situation, or maybe even your budget. And, I know Tyler's big on, there's an author out there, well-known author, Adam Grant, I think. And,
Yeah.
he's even claimed, the idea of best management practices can be misleading. And, Tyler and I are not, here to preach that this is the end-all be-all document. And certainly the idea of best sometimes means ultimate or final, but, that's not what this is implying at all. But rather, these are just recommended or recommendations based upon, what's been out there by the data. Tyler, if you want to advance to our question here, think about what are best management practices? How do we get them? What are they founded upon? What determines whether something is a best management practice or recommended best management practice, we might say. A lot of that comes down to science. A lot of that comes down to scientific research and data. So why is this important? Well, consider, and this is something that, all of us are probably familiar with. We hear it a lot now, even when we're not only managing sports fields, but, watching sports being played. The idea of analytics now in sports, whether it's, baseball and way back when with Moneyball and Billy Bean, or even now when you're watching football, you hear Joe Buck or, Jim Nantz come on, and this is powered by AWS, or, our analytics tracker here says that, this, Travis Kelce ran topped out at, 22 miles an hour, or just whatever. We live in this data-driven world now, and that could certainly be true for you as the sports field managers. So it's important to consider, why is this important? Why is working and living and, considering adopting a data-driven mentality in sports field management important? Well, just like the BMP manual, environmental stewardship is key. Environmental stewardship and enhancing and promoting being good stewards of our environment, whether we're managing synthetic turf, whether we're managing natural grass fields, or even hybrid turf pitches, whether we're at a really low budget facility or a really high budget facility, whether we're managing facilities for, superstars like Patrick Mahomes, or if we're just managing them for the local youth rec sports leagues. It's important to also continually be good stewards of our environment. And thinking about our athletes and our coaches and all the people that use the fields, playability, plays a big role. The playability of the field, the safety of the field, even at a site-specific level, we can incorporate data in those situations. Additionally, we can also, think about using data-driven mindsets and processes or approaches in sports field management because of just the idea of that the dollar, we're having to stretch them further and further. Well, things are certainly not getting more affordable in any aspects. We're still asked to continue to maximize and produce the same, results year after year, while our budgets may not grow year after year. And additionally, maximizing our professionalism, can go a long way in showing that we've done our homework. We're using objective or science-based data and not just, leaving it up to a bias or opinion, but, using hard-founded or scientific data to make these decisions. And remember, this is a combination of not only, using art and producing aesthetic fields, but also, using science and using data. One of my favorite, ads that came out a few years ago, and I don't recall if this was on the Golf Channel or where it was. I saw it a lot on YouTube though, and I saw it on a few other websites and things. But the GCSA had a really nice ad, TV spot, thinking about, promoting the career of the golf course superintendent. What goes into maintaining the course. And I think the opening shot was that guy up in the left corner, making the putt. And they said, what goes into making this putt? And it talked about the guy and the stroke speed and his grip and maybe the concentration. But then it said, what goes into maintaining the course? And you have, all the things that superintendents are involved with in terms of the data, the science. It's not just an art. It's not just a putting green with, lasers and like no skips or anything and perfect conditions. There's a lot of science involved. And I know the SFMA, they're working on, similar objectives and missions in terms of the advocacy for you as a sports field professional. We even have an advocacy committee on the SFMA and, working towards things like this to advocate that you guys are, using the stuff. You're not just out there, just mowing for the heck of it and watering just because you think it needs water. You too are using all of these things in your day-to-day decisions and day-to-day management practices. So let's think about this. And as we continue on today, how can we adopt or how can we employ data-driven decision making? What does this mean for me as a sports manager? How can I use these PMPs, or how can I use the research out of Dr. Carr's program or any of the research programs that you're familiar with? Well, we're going to talk about that for the next few minutes of the presentation, but we're going to touch on these in basically 4 different categories. So the first one is you want to ask questions. You want to be asking questions. It's okay to be curious. A lot of times when Tyler and I give talks, even today at the end of the presentation, Jennifer's going to ask the crowd if there's any questions or what questions you may have. And we realize a lot of times public forums and settings are not everybody's comfortable asking questions, but if we're at an event with you, or if you're at an event with another professor or grad student or some other researcher, or even if it's just an industry person, it doesn't have to be anybody from a university, go up and ask some questions. And Tyler's going to talk about that here in a second, about maybe what questions you can ask to improve data-driven decision making. But then you can use that data to inform your decision making, to enhance your decision making, and then apply the things that you learn from that data, apply these trusted scientific findings to your management practices. And in some cases, if you have the time and the space, you may be even bold enough to conduct your own scientific research. So let's walk through these 4 things together. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carr now. Tyler, take it away, my man.
Yeah, and so I do want to add that if you guys have any questions while we're going through this, feel free to add in the Q&A box on either on the top or bottom of your screen. We're happy to answer those throughout the presentation. So some of you may have been at the SFMA conference we had in Daytona Beach a couple weeks ago. And when you go to these types of events, you're presented with a lot of information. There's a lot of data that's coming after you. And so we're going to, like Dan said, we're going to go through and figure out some different things that you want to make sure you look out for when you're presented with different information, so you can make the most informed decision. And there's some key pertinent questions that you need to ask when it comes to any type of information that's coming at you. Is this product even necessary for my specific needs? Do I really need it to make the grass perform the way it needs to? Are there better alternatives? Is the response actually from the active ingredients, or is it from some other type of factor? Did it just warm up outside and the grass started to grow more? Or is it the product? What about the impact, duration, and consistency of the response? Is it something you're going to have to apply every 2 weeks, or can you apply it every 6 weeks? These are things that we need to understand. Are objective published research findings available? So peer-reviewed publications are the gold standard for information in terms of data-driven decisions. And so be good to find published research findings. We'll show you where to find those and kind of how to distill some of those here in a bit. Could I try this first on a trial basis? So a lot of people and companies will give you a product, a small amount, so you can try on a small scale. And do the benefits justify the cost? Or can I achieve this with a product, the same response from a product that may cost less? So the next couple slides, we're going to go through kind of some different things that you may gather from research or data that's presented to you. One of these is this concept we like to refer to as the axis of evil. We go through trade publications, we see we go to trade shows and even some presentations. We see a lot of bar graphs. In this case, it's a bar graph representing different products and their ability to control a particular disease. So from this figure, we can see it looks like 3 different products that perform relatively different. This control looks like it's not performing as well as the competitor's brand, and then definitely not our brand. But when we look at figures like this, especially bar charts, we need to look at this axis and make sure this axis starts at 0. If it doesn't start at 0, it's been condensed to make it look like the differences are greater than they really are. So if we blow this, look at like at a 30,000 foot view of this figure, we see these different the different disease control for these products, and we see that they look like they're not as different as they once did. In a second, we'll talk about statistical significance and how it's really important to include in these types of figures so you can really have an accurate assessment of the differences there. Another thing that we want if you leave with nothing other than this, it's that correlation does not imply causation. Just because you applied a product and you saw this response doesn't mean that this product caused this response. And there's this website, tylervigen.com, that has all these wild correlations out there. Just further driving this fact that just because these two things just happen to be related in terms of how they progress on a graph, they don't cause each other. So this is the per capita cheese consumption correlated with number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. So that's pretty highly correlated, but I'm not sure if I'm going to stop my cheese consumption because of the fear of becoming tangled in my bed sheets. So lots of different ways to manipulate data to make things look correlated. And, just keep that in mind when you're looking at data. Now, another thing that we want to drive down everyone is this concept of selection bias. So selection bias, I like to think of it as what you see depends on where you look. And this is this whole thing and that we see in our industry about different products and gauging their effectiveness. It all depends on what lens you're looking at them in. So one example is this product is guaranteed to increase nitrogen uptake by X%. If that's compared to a non-treated control, that makes sense. If you're applying a nitrogen product versus a different product, that may not make sense. This cultivar requires X% less pesticide, fertilizer, or water. This product demonstrated X% better control of weeds, diseases, or insects. So some questions that we need to ask is, compared to what? Are we comparing this to something that received no treatment? Or are we comparing this to an industry standard or competitor? These are questions that are important. We've hit this fact as well. Are these data available in peer-reviewed publications? That is the gold standard. And what were the experimental environmental conditions of the study? A lot of things that we talk about in science, and if you read research papers or summarizations of research in sports field management or GCM, it's important to note that what we find in research is applicable to the environment within the study. We can make some, we can see how these may relate in other areas, different soil textures, different climates, but it's important to see what the conditions were for the study.
Yeah, so Tyler kind of referenced, sources of data and some of the, stuff that you're probably familiar with and seeing, either research findings from industries or organizations or, the vendor or the manufacturers themselves. But we're going to talk about, where are these sources of data may be located, or where do you as a sports field manager, how do you come across this data? Where are some of these data available? Well, and we're not going to go over every single source today, but some things to kind of keep an eye out for in case you're wondering, where to connect with researchers or university scientists or grad student research that you come across. One of the biggest, just most easily accessible sources are, university program websites, or a lot of them have blogs. Tyler and his colleagues at OSU, they have a nice website, and I know him and Pam and some of the other faculty there are always, posting little blog posts and updates, and while it may not be a full-on research paper, there's going to be some data, within each of those articles. I know when I was in Minnesota, they have a really good website and a blog too. We're hoping to get one started here at Tech at some point, but that's one source of data that you could consider and to refer to. A lot of times it'll just be a snippet of what the research project is about. Of course, Tyler, they're talking at, state conference or regional conferences, or just like we had in the photo of the national conference. This is another opportunity to come across, hard-founded research data, or maybe research that's in progress with some scientific data.
I almost
Another
wore that pullover today, so I'm glad I didn't.
Another opportunity for you to, find data, may not think about this, is at university field days. I don't know how many of you are able to get out to your local university field days, or, even if you don't have one in your state, maybe if you ever opportunity ever comes to go to a neighboring state that has them, this is a very common practice, not just in turf, but, across different ag commodities. But, these are some of the funnest events for me and Tyler. I don't know if funnest is a word, but most fun events for
They're
Tyler
pretty
and I,
fun.
because it gives us the opportunity to connect with you guys and show off the research. And we will be the first to admit, we acknowledge these aren't sports fields. These are research spots. We don't have people out there with playing sports or anything. While we do impose some traffic stress from time to time, this is a great opportunity though for you to see the research and visit with the researchers, but also to get some of the actual data and see how the research has been implemented. In today's age of technology, other sources of data and how that's disseminated, podcasts are big, video simulcasts are big. Tyler and his colleagues, the Ohio State Turfcrest program, they have a YouTube channel, and the Turf Team Times that they have. I know when Tyler was at Tennessee, they had Tennessee Turf Tuesdays as well. So SFMA, they have a podcast. I know John Comita and the group behind that, do a good job of putting podcast episodes. And while you may not be visually seeing data, in these types of mediums, it's still data and science that's being provided for you. Of course, more traditional sources of data that you may think of are, things like trade publications or scientific journal articles. We have a number of those in our industry, sports field management. There may be research briefs. I don't think I fit into that, polo anymore. I don't know. I'm about to bust out of it there, I guess. But, things like crop forage and turf management, the agronomy journal, there's other journals. I know Dr. Straw, one of our really good friends, he publishes a lot of, science and things that he's doing with athletic fields and other journals. But, these are sources of data. And while you may be, curious about, how do I access these actual scientific journals, and something I want to read in those and not just sports field management, because, there's not always a whole bunch of articles or scientific journal articles in the sports field management. You can actually go to the Turfgrass information file, and we've got the website there in black. There's a couple of different options that you can go to. You can open it up here on this page, and like on the guided search, and under the drop down menu, when it says like search for and then as a, there before it says browse index, you can actually type in something. If you knew it came out of Dr. Carr's program, you can search by author. If you knew the name of his grad student, if you looked for something from Dr. Straw or myself or Kylie Dixon or Dr. Sorokin, you can search by author. You can search by, let's say you have an issue with Poa annua, annual bluegrass, or you have an issue with spring dead spot on your Bermuda grass. You could type it in by those things. But another thing you could do is use the full text resources. If you're just curious and have some time on your hands and you want to browse through crop science or browse through the crop forage and turf journals, let's say you've lost your SFMA magazine, your sports field management magazine, those are available online as well. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I do want us to focus on the idea of research articles, because Tyler and I both understand those can be intimidating. I know when Tyler and I were first starting out, for one, we were kind of both looking at these and like, what the heck does all of this mean? This is a
Am
lot
I
of
going to be
words.
able? Is it going to take me 10 days to read it? Like, yeah.
Yeah, it could be overwhelming. It's certainly a valid, concern, a valid feeling. But Tyler and I are going to spend the next few minutes kind of walking through, what a research paper is and kind of how to just really look for what you're look specifically at the sections that you need in these papers. And maybe hopefully if you come across, another one of these down the road, that you can maybe use some of that data that's in there and some of the information in there and then apply that scientific data, that scientific research in your facility. So let's talk about these components of the research paper. I'll introduce them and then turn it over to Tyler, but we're not going to have the time to talk about every single component today. But the first component is the abstract, and that's that section in light blue there on the left-hand side of the left-hand column of that paper. And an abstract is basically just a summary of the research. What was the issue? What was the research objective? What were they looking at? What were some of the conditions, in terms of the environment or the treatments that they imposed? And then what were some of the results and the implications for you as the turfgrass manager? I will give a fair warning though, and Tyler and I, one thing that we do when we have to put out these papers, we have to convert everything to metric forms because this is, supposed to be accessible by not only folks here in the United States, but everywhere domestically by our industry and scientific peers across the world. So that's just one other kind of intimidating thing that sometimes comes across. But otherwise, the abstract is generally, pretty straightforward. It's usually, no more than 250 words for most of our journals. And then as you work through the paper, there's a little bit of background or introduction, kind of explaining the problem, like, oh, we're fighting, spring dead spot, in this area or in this, situations in the mid-Atlantic, or maybe Tyler, and he's working with summer patch there, and, the great state of Ohio, other things. And then you work into the section of like the materials and methods. Well, what did we do? How did we conduct the experiment? Where was it conducted? What time of year? How long was it conducted? What all was involved in terms of applying the treatments. And then we, talk about the results of the study. What happened after we applied these treatments? What happened, with the data we collected? What did these data tell us? And we discuss, what that means in terms of the treatments themselves, or maybe the combination of the treatments and the location with a time of year. And then finally, at the end of these papers, you'll have a section on, how is this applicable to you as a sports field manager, as a turf manager, or what might this imply for folks who are managing, whatever the species or the turf was at this experiment or this study, under, similar conditions. So that's about as much as we're going to get into, an overview of scientific research, but Tyler is going to walk us through, some specific parts of the research papers that are really important for you as a sports field manager in terms of the data. So Tyler, take it away.
Yeah. So when you go through these research papers in the results and discussion section, you're going to see lots of different tables and figures. And we're just going to go through a couple types of figures that you'll see and give you some tidbits of information on kind of how to distill these. So first, we're going to talk about this concept of least significant difference. All this means is that when people talk about least significant difference, they're gonna put either some type of value or letter that indicates that treatments are different from each other. So when letters are different, that means that the treatments are significantly different. So when we see a figure like this, or a scatter plot or anything, we first want to look at the axes. So we're looking at surface hardness. So this would probably be taken with a Clegg on the horizontal axis, traffic events on the vertical axis. And so we look at 50 traffic events and we see how different, these were different soil moisture treatments, how they impacted surface hardness. So we can see that the drier treatment had a firmer surface than the medium treatment, then the wetter treatment, then the high water content treatment. And you can see that these letters are different. They are significantly different. But if you look at the different traffic levels, so from 1 to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, some of these treatments are not significantly different. For example, AB still shares the letter A. So 20 and 30 would not be significantly different. B and B would not be significantly different. So when you see letters keep an eye on if those letters are different, because that will denote significant difference. Oftentimes, and we didn't include this in the previous table, but sometimes it's important to look at this footnote here. And it says, within columns, means followed by the same letter are not significantly different according to Fisher's protected LSD. So that's LSD. That means we're going to be looking for letters. And they mean within a given column like this, if they follow the same, if a letter follows the mean and they're similar, they're not significantly different. So you can see 88 through 92.8, they're not significantly different, but there are significant differences here. Then we go over to this other month, and we get a little more there's some more complications here in terms of multiple letters, and sometimes you'll see this when the least significant difference value is rather large. So, for example, here we have F and G. This one has FG. It's not significantly different from G, but it's also not significantly different from this value with the F. So it kind of goes up and down in terms of the means that you're denoting for significant differences. So if we had that bar chart that we were looking at earlier that had the different disease controls, if they had letters denoting if they were significantly different, we would actually be able to say that there's evidence supporting those differences, but it's really hard to see just from a figure, just from numbers. Another way this data is reported, LSD values, is they'll just give you an LSD value. So instead of putting letters beside every mean, they'll give you an LSD value. So I'll read this. To determine statistical differences among entries, subtract one entry's mean from another entry's mean. Statistical differences occur when this value is larger than the corresponding LSD value. So we see the LSD values here in this line. So if in this month over here, if values are at this location, if these values are more than 0.4, if the difference is more than 0.4, they are significantly different. So you could see that 6.2 is more than 0.4, greater than 5.4, but there are lots of entries over here that have that are similar. So this is how INTEP data is generally presented. But we can also see that when you get more within site variability, so like there's more noise in the data, those LSD values can be greater, making it where it's more difficult to detect differences between those treatments.
Hey, Tyler, can you go back real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is important. This is some data that you guys are probably familiar with if you've ever looked through, cultivar or variety trial data. Maybe you're thinking of regrassing your sports fields or different areas, and you're looking at INTEP data, and you're looking at, some of the varietal data. It doesn't have to be INTEP. It could be something like A-list. It could be something like TIBCA or some other variety data. This is, I think, a creeping bentgrass data. I'm trying to think of where this is from, but this is from one of the, I think, the 2014 or 2015 INTEP bentgrass trial. And so if you're looking at that first column there on the far right that Tyler pointed out, this is the overall average across all that locations. But something that Tyler and I would, urge you guys to do is to look at, the study that's closest to your location. So for instance, if you're in Minnesota, let's say you're in Minneapolis, St. Paul area working on some sports fields, look at the data there for the research station there in Roseville, in St. Paul. And that data is going to be hopefully more beneficial for you or more applicable for you at that facility. So you'll notice, as Tyler pointed out, each of those locations themselves for those states and where those are located are typically at the university research station that's there in your state. So like Minnesota would be the University of Minnesota, Virginia would be Virginia Tech. So, it's going to be close to that area, closer in your state. So thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Dan. Some of these, it's also like they put these trials in different parts of the country so they see how they perform in different parts of the country. You can see that there was much higher quality in Minnesota than there was in Oklahoma, contributing to this lower mean here. So interesting how different some of these grasses perform in different areas. So another concept that we see sometimes, but not nearly as much, is standard deviation. So this is really just demonstrating the error or the variability within a data set. And so, for example, here, let's say we took soil test results and we stratified them, where we were determining the percent sand at different levels from 0 centimeters to 80 centimeters. And they find the mean within the 0 to 5 centimeter of 16.5% sand. But that range went from almost 0% sand to over 30-something% sand. So they have these high error ranges. That means plus or minus. So it could be well above 30, or it could be near 0. You get down to this 75 to 80 centimeter depth, that error is much less. They're pretty confident in that data. So whenever you see low standard deviation values, you would expect that data to be more precise than higher standard deviation values. So when you're looking at these data, we're looking at this data so we can determine, new tools, new practices to apply at our facility. And so we really need to think, how can we apply these to our facility? And so over the next couple slides, we're going to talk about ways for you to conduct your own research at your facility.
Yeah, so remember what we started out with. Remember our, question at the beginning about, have you ever heard, the phrase turfgrass management is an art and a science? Because again, we recognize that, you guys are not at research facilities, you're not publishing scientific papers. Your main goal is to, provide a safe and playable, high quality playing surface, protect the student athletes or the professional athletes or, the local community athletes that are out there using the field, promote environmental sustainability and different things. But, thinking about all the things that Tyler and I have talked about so far, we want you guys to remember that you're an artist, but you guys can also, be scientists in yourself and use, the data that comes out of university research and private research programs. But you can also, conduct your own research. You don't have to wait around for folks like Tyler and I to do a study. You can become scientists in and of yourself. After all, turfgrass management is an art and a science. Let's talk about how you can conduct your own research. And, the biggest, key or the silver bullet to all of this is the scientific method. The scientific method, something you may have heard about, back when you were in third grade biology class and, doing, projects with, plants and things, or maybe your kids at home are learning about the scientific method. We still use that same processes now, and, no longer as third graders, but now as, university researchers and scientists, we're still using the trusted, tried and true scientific method. And really this all, entails observations and hypotheses, research objectives, entails experimental designs and treatment protocols. What is this experiment going to look like? What treatments are we going to include? How often are we going to, apply these treatments and so on? And then let's collect some data. We've applied all these treatments. Let's figure out what the treatments are telling us, or the effects of those treatments are telling us, and then let's analyze them. Let's analyze the data, as Tyler just went over with us. And then, let's then write about what this might mean for you as a professional or as a practitioner, and how this might apply to you. And again, we recognize that, you guys don't have the time or, maybe the resources to do all these things, but you do have, probably more power than you may realize, in the sense of, you don't have to have a really large grand scheme, all out experiment just to be a scientist. There's a lot of different things that, can also work on a small scale and still employ the scientific method. So
And I will say that this is a stepwise approach. Um, it will you want to define objectives before you determine what treatments you're applying. It makes things more efficient. So if you want to determine what product is going to work for spring dead spot, you don't want to apply a lot of different. You need to identify that as your objective and apply products that will have control for spring dead spot, not products that are geared towards Pythium. And it seems like, okay, duh, but we don't want, like, for example, we don't want to just collect data and go take a lot of Clegg measurements on our field if we don't have a reason for doing it. We're not trying to end up, we don't have a clear objective on why we're doing that, because we may be wasting resources.
yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point, Tyler, in terms of just, thinking this as a stepwise process, and keeping things in the scientific method in the order that we've listed them. And a lot of times, what do they say? The necessity is the mother of invention. There's a lot of things that, in terms of how we get experiments or research studies, who thinks to do these things, or, why did they decide to evaluate these things? Why is Dr. Carr evaluating spring dead spot, or why is, Dr. Dixon out in Tennessee doing all this research on artificial turf fields and field safety and playability and different things? We all have questions. We have things that arise. All of you do a great job of submitting to John Mascara's photo quiz. I know he's got this in the GCM publication, and he's got these in the SFMA magazine, the Sportsman Management magazine, as well. Other things, in terms of observation, sometimes we're just genuinely curious. Sometimes accidents happen, something is spilled or something is missed, but then we realize, hey, this actually turned out better, or this spill accidentally, caused such and such to happen, which improved, turf grass quality, or, traffic tolerance or wear tolerance, or different things. Sometimes we're forced to change. Sometimes we need to do research because of, forced changes or required alternatives, or challenges that come our way. Maybe we're, losing, or not getting as much in our budget the next year. So we've got to find other solutions that, that we have to employ. And we need to research whether these things are sustainable, or even able to help us overcome those challenges. So another phrase,
especially pesticide use in some areas of the country.
yeah, right now,
use them anymore,
pesticides, legislation and regulatory policies that are affecting the options available to you. That's a great point, Tyler. Another phrase, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but just something that you probably hear at SFMA meetings, or short courses or workshops in your state or in your region that you may attend, is you'll hear folks like Tyler or myself or other professors, Dr. Goatley here with me at Virginia Tech, talk about testing hypotheses or hypotheses testing. And really, this is kind of a part of the scientific method that gets overlooked, but it's essentially, we're testing, these assumptions in terms of, like, well, if I do this, if I apply nitrogen, then, I am going to assume that my grass will be healthier or greener, or that I may have to, have more clippings. I may end up with more clippings in my basket or something if I apply nitrogen, or maybe you're examining relationships between, two different products or two different treatments. And so a lot of times hypothesis testing is just really evaluating, the likelihood that, A affects B, or the combinations of A and B might affect, something else. One treatment affects, the turf in some way, or the combination of treatments may affect the turf in another way. But, another step of the scientific method that Tyler talked about are those research objectives, and, really figuring out what you ultimately want to research, based upon those assumptions, based upon those evaluations of the likelihoods that you have already thought about. Maybe, it is applying nitrogen to a situation, to a turf, or some other, aspect of research, creating well-defined research objective. What are you ultimately trying to figure out? We conducted this research to determine or to identify what? At the end of the day, think of research objectives as you just really trying to fill the knowledge gap. You're trying to bring about new information for something that we currently don't know the answer to. And so we're conducting the research. Our objective is to conduct that research. The USGA Green section had a really cool article, really great article last fall. We've linked it there at the bottom. And Tyler and I have showed a lot of research and links so far, especially when we're going over the axis of evil, evil, and some of the other resources. We've linked all those at the end. So, if you're curious about any of these, and we encourage you to do the homework yourself and, go back and review some of these resources we've referenced. But this is a good article that we encourage you to look at, written by, I think, Dr. Cole Thompson, back last fall, talking about the value of turfgrass research. Let's talk about what else goes into, as we've talked about objectives and issues and hypotheses, moving into materials and methods.
Yeah,
There's a
and
lot.
doesn't that article say that turfgrass research provides almost $2 billion worth of economic impact to the golf
Oh.
course industry every year? I think it's something crazy like that. So a lot of the management practices we do are definitely founded in research. We're not biased though.
Yeah, so thinking about like all the things that make go into a research project, what might be some things that you might need to conduct research at your facility? And again, we're not talking about big grand experiments, but just some of the basic needs that are required or involved in many research projects. So Tyler, feel free to kind of put all these on the board. We'll talk through them really fast, but you just need an area to conduct research. You need equipment to apply your treatments, whether it's fertilizers, whether it's chemicals like pesticides, or even foliar fertilizers, or other types of products, PGRs, wetting agents. You need technology to collect the data, whether it's just visual rating or if it's more objective-based equipment like cameras or sensors or meters or things like the Clegg impact tester. You may need software to run or analyze the data or insert the data. We're not just recording these things and keeping them on pen and paper for all time. You need people, you need personnel, whether it's your staff, whether it's an intern, whether it's yourself. You also need funding, which, we could all use more money, but the biggest thing, and Tyler made a really good point of this earlier, is we can't go crazy with this, because the one thing that we often overlook if we get too ahead of ourselves is the time that's required to do all these things, whether it's just design the experiment, to implement and apply treatments, and then to collect data. There's some projects that I've helped my colleague, Dr. David McCall here. We spend all day. We spent 12-hour days just collecting data on spring dead spots. It takes a lot of time. We certainly understand that. And then thinking about the methods. I do want to go back, Tyler, real quick. This article link here, I encourage you to read that as well. It's a really short article written by one of my former mentors, or I guess still a mentor, Dr. Eric Watkins. He does a really good job of describing even a behind the scenes look at how much research costs. But thinking about the methodology involved, and this is something Tyler will talk about here in a couple of minutes, is making sure that, okay, we have these ideas, we have these objectives, we have our treatments, we have our materials that we need. How are we going to conduct this research? We need to make sure we have good, justifiable protocols, making sure we're maintaining the turf for the experimental area, in a more realistic setting. We're going to do things as close to realistic as you guys are doing them as sports field managers when we're conducting sports field research at our universities. Or, if this is a golf experiment, we're going to, maintain the turf as if it was a USGA putting green or a fairway or a tee box. We're not going to do anything outside the norm of, traditional management, unless the protocol deems it necessary. How often are we going to apply our treatments? What's the intensity or the frequency of those treatment applications? How often are we going to collect data or sample the experimental area for data? And then also going back to that, concept of time itself. And then one thing that Tyler pointed out earlier is, a lot of times we need to be making or conducting experiments or conducting research in comparison to untreated controls. What if we had not done anything? Or maybe that untreated control, sometimes you can treat that as an industry standard of like, okay, we traditionally apply 1/10 of a pound of, urea foliarly, during the summer and cool season turf, that might be our standard control. Or it just may have something that's, just not treated at all and left to be as is. So,
which is very common in like disease trials. We're going to compare the product to if you didn't do anything. Did it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know all of this could be overwhelming. We know this is a lot of material, but we do want to kind of give you a little bit of insight in terms of the experimental design process and let you guys see that, this isn't too far-fetched of an opportunity for maybe you to employ. I know I've visited with sports field managers at different facilities. I had a student interning, I think, a few years ago with a professional NFL team, and that sports field manager actually had a small little trial set up with different varieties of Bermuda grass set up at their location. It was really impressive to see. So the biggest thing, 2 R's that Tyler and I want you to take away with thinking about maybe conducting your own experiments, thinking about not only being an artist, but also being a scientist, is randomization and replication. These are 2 very important R's. So these really play a role in terms of setting up experiments. One of the experimental designs that's very common out there is something called a completely randomized design. So in this experiment, Tyler, if you want to skip ahead here, we have 4 treatments. When you include that untreated control, that could be considered a treatment. And then let's say these other 3 treatments, treatment A, B, and C, are all different fertilizers, or maybe they're different pesticides, or maybe they're the same pesticide but applied at different rates. Maybe they're different cultivars. Maybe we have 3 genetically improved cultivars, and then an older variety there is our untreated control. The biggest thing that you think about here is that there are 4 treatments, and then there are 4 replications of each treatment. And you see that all of these treatments are randomized, and that really helps us in terms of the statistical power and making sure that we're not, creating any biases there within the site itself. Another
And Dan,
design.
would you say 3 to 4 replications would be standard for field trials?
Yeah, certainly a minimum of 3, and we recognize that, space, in addition to the time, that kind of goes back to the experimental design. You want to make sure that you have at least a minimum of 3 replications. I know for a lot of our variety trials, like for INTEP and other industry variety trials, minimum of 3. If you have room to do 4, great, but just realize that that's more time and more equipment and supplies and materials needed. But a minimum of 3 is good. One of the design that we want to share with you is something that also can increase your statistical power, but also, maybe something to consider when you're limited by things like site conditions or variability at your site. Maybe it's a slope effect, maybe it's a shading effect, and that is the idea of blocking. Blocking your treatments, where now, instead of on our previous slide, we had the treatments just randomized in that 4x4 square. Now that they're kind of blocked, we're into columns. And so our reps kind of also equal our blocks, or the arrangement of our blocks. We still have 4 replications. We have actually 5 treatments now, with treatments A through D, plus our untreated control. But you can see here, we still do have the randomization occurring. We still have replication occurring, but each treatment only occurs once in each column. So imagine this in a situation where maybe you want to do a research trial, as Tyler kind of encouraged us earlier, to ask if you can use stuff on a trial basis. You could set up a small little experiment like this, but let's say, maybe you're fighting shade in one area, you're on a slope, maybe it's a drainage issue, you can block your treatments to account for those site-specific variabilities. So the last experimental design is probably Tyler's favorite, certainly one of my favorites as well. We recognize that, not all of you, not everyone, has the time or the resources to put in any of these experimental designs. But Tyler, tell us about the check plot design.
Yeah, so check plot design sometimes happens by accident, sometimes by, on purpose. This is really something where maybe you only want to evaluate a single treatment versus a control. So sometimes, like I said, happens by accident. In this case, this guy, Matt Gurley, did not overlap his pre-emergence herbicide application. And so you can see that that the product works. So that's justification to his Greens Committee for continuing to use that product. So sometimes it happens by accident. Sometimes you can formally have a check plot. So this would be a disease trial. And what you can do is put down a small piece of plywood, spray paint the corners so you know where to put it down every time you apply a product. So then you can literally see how the product performs versus if you didn't apply that product at all. So this is a really easy, it's a super easy tool that we recommend people do. If you're working at if you have a baseball or softball complex, this is something you could put out near the outfield fence where not many people could see it from the stands, and test out different products that you're interested in. So we have our design of our experiment. So how do we, we've talked about a little bit of data collection. There's so many different tools out there for us to collect data with. How do we know what data collection method that we want to explore? If we have a fertilizer trial, maybe we're focused on the response of the grass to that treatment. Maybe we're trying out a different aerification practice, so we want to see what's going on underground, or we want to see how that's affected the surface hardness, or other things that we could do or monitor the infiltration rates in the soil from different things. So as you see where I'm coming from, we need to define our objective, like I said earlier, and then appropriately create appropriate data collection methods to determine that impact. So a couple of different tools that we have. One is heavily used in the golf industry. I'm seeing more and more people use these in the sports turf industry. These are handheld soil moisture meters. These can help you determine where your dry spots are, where your wet spots are. And they even have probe links of different depths. So if you're trying out a new wetting agent or different irrigation practices on different zones within your system, you can go out, measure soil moisture with one of these handheld meters, and easily compare your different regimes. Another tool is a shear vane. This is essentially a torque wrench that measures rotational traction. So there's like little cleats on the bottom of this machine, and maybe you have a treatment that, or maybe you're trying to create different treatments that are going to affect the density of your plant, something that's going to make it tighter. And a shear vane may be the tool that helps you assess the strength of that surface. So, we've seen soil moisture. Now we're talking about surface strength, and then we can also go below ground on a more physical property standpoint. And this would be more geared towards like your aerification practices. So this is a sand-based root zone. Looks like they threw a layer of sod on top of it that was kind of on a native soil. So you have a little bit of a fine texture there. So you can go out, take a profile. It's awesome taking pictures with rulers beside it, so you have something to gauge against in subsequent photos. And you can see on the right that the roots are pretty limited. This is from a putting green. But then you can go in and make an aerification core and backfill that with sand. You could then go back and measure how long those roots are. You could measure infiltration rate. You can justify your management practices. You can this is all about conducting your own research. Not just conducting your own research, but validating your management practices or changing your management practices, which is essentially research. Some tools that on the left is something that we see a lot in the golf industry. It's measuring clipping volume. Superintendents are going out and measuring out how many clippings, or the volume of clippings that they're collecting on a green, and then adjusting their fertilization practices after that. So this is something you could do if you're collecting clippings. On the right, instead of visual quality to measure turfgrass performance, this is just an objective way to do it. It's a turfgrass color meter from Spectrum Technologies. Any of these data collection tools that we've looked at can be used in isolation, but you can collect multiple data points across your field and map them so that you can see the variability of that particular variable, whether it's hardness or soil moisture, across your whole field, because there's plenty of research out there indicating that surface variability can impact player performance and safety. So if you have any interest in building these types of maps to justify different management practices, reach out to us. And to segue into that, it's important to partner with university researchers to conduct this data analysis. You get a lot of data. Sometimes it's hard to understand how to develop trends from these data and how to interpret them and apply them at your setting. So on the left is a pretty good map of where a lot of the land grant universities are. Some of them have turf programs, some of them don't. I know Sportsfield Management Magazine has highlighted a lot of turfgrass programs. So reach out to your local turfgrass program to help analyze data, but also reach out to them before you start collecting, before you start researching, so you can define your research objectives with them. Dan, you want to take it to the end?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, hopefully if you can start collecting your own data or doing your own small site-specific experiments, because we understand, we don't have athletes on our research plots or things like this, but, you can be your own scientist. I remember attending a SFMA meeting a couple of years ago, and Gerald Henry, Dr. Henry down there in Georgia, he challenged the room, he bookended his presentation by challenging the sportsfield managers to be their own scientists, be your own scientists, and, then apply those results to your facility. Yay or nay, whether it worked or not, now you have some objective, data to help you make data-driven decisions. So apply your results and then also share your story. Tell us, tell the researchers, tell the people you partnered with, tell your employers or your, board of directors or your trustees, whoever's, in charge of your budget, maybe in terms of giving you more and justifying why you need certain products or a certain amount of labor or different things. Those objective data can provide a good story for you to tell in making those justifications and requests. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Tyler.
and share with your share on social media. You can share with your peers as well. I mean, we have lots of practitioners speaking at the national conference every year and regional conferences. Practitioners love to hear from other practitioners because it's the real world.
Yeah, I think the call for presentations just open. So I think we all
Mhm.
have until maybe March or something to put in some presentations. So I know it's probably too close of a turnaround time for any of us to be conducting experiments, but something to maybe think about for next year. But think about at the end of the day why all this is important. Why are Tyler and I spending the time with you today for all of us and anybody listening, post conference and the recording. We've talked about being in a data-driven world. The athletes, the coaches, Andy Reid and, all these other guys, the baseball guys, they're all using analytics. How about the sports field managers? Well, you guys could be using analytics too. You guys could be using data as well to help inform and improve your decision making. We live in a data-driven world, and turfgrass management is an art and a science. A tale as old as time itself. Something that Tyler and I will continue to say, and the professors and researchers that come along after us. It's not just a cliche. It's very much reality. And then ultimately, our expectations, your expectations, the employers' expectations, supervisors' expectations, they continue to grow. Our budgets become more restrictive. So now this coming time that it's already coming down the pike, and for many of you that these expectations grow more and more, but your budgets are not growing, and so we need to figure out and research new alternatives, new possibilities by using research and collecting data and using those results to inform our decision making. So a few other just slides to leave you with. We have a lot of resources that we've referenced here, but Tyler's done a great job. He's put all this and compiled all these references and articles. Many of them are written by superintendents or by sports field managers. They're not all scientific publications. They're written by folks like you and your peers in the industry that talk and do a really good job of summarizing a lot of the points that we've talked about today. So go ahead and visit that link. And that's all I have. Tyler, any closing words for the group today?
No, it's about a lot of people speak in numbers, right? And so providing those numbers, especially to your decision makers on how your management practices impact their product and your product, can help you tremendously in the long run. So reach out if you guys have need any support, need any help justifying anything that you're trying to do. We're happy to be that resource. and our contacts are also here as well. So I know we're a couple minutes over. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer them. If not, feel free to send us an email.
We're both on Twitter, so I think Tyler Talks Turf, and I'm at the BT Turf Teaching. So you can send us a DM, you could tag us in a tweet, you could email us, or if you're in Ohio, or if you're in Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic or the Midwest, try to come to one of our field days, connect with us. We love talking to y'all and learning more about what you do and seeing if we can help you solve any of the challenges that you're facing in your facility.
So thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll leave the chat open for a little bit if anybody has any final questions. Okay, doesn't look like we have any questions, but our panelists have their information there, so I know that they'll be happy to answer questions if anything pops up. Thank you again for this valuable presentation. It will be available on our website, on the SFMA website, as well as in our conference education library later this month. Thank you to our attendees, and thank you again to our panelists. This has been a very valuable presentation. Well, if there are other questions.
Thanks for the invitation, Jennifer.
Of course.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you. Yeah, if there's nothing else, then I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you guys.